Hello and welcome. I'm Adam Adams, and on this channel, we're cranking out almost one killer educational video like this every single week. So hit that little red subscribe button to stay in the loop. All right, so Allison Kirschbaum is an expert in storage unit investing. As I record this, she's already got 1,500 units cash flowing. Get ready to learn why she chooses this asset class above all others. There's two things that I think you're going to like. Number one, she's reducing payroll by using automated kiosks. And number two, how cheap she's being able to keep her turnovers every time somebody moves out. So enjoy this 1 hour educational video and I'll bring it in.
And let's keep the applause going with another round of applause for Adam and his team and all the great work they do. You guys may not know this, but Adam's group of lunch meetups is currently the most popular, best attended group of real estate meetups in the entire state of Colorado. And that is very hard to do because I personally have been to almost every single type of real estate meetup in Colorado, and a lot of them suck. Adam and his team do not suck. So congrats to Adam for hitting that huge milestone, best attended real estate meetup in Colorado. So Adam is correct. I am on a number of podcasts. I typically do 3 podcast interviews every single week. They take about a month or 2 of lag time to actually get posted on most podcast sites, and we've just recently ramped up to that 3 a week interview limit. So you may not see me on as many podcasts right now, but we will be on between 2 dozen and 3 dozen of the most well-known, best listened to real estate podcasts on iTunes within the next couple of months. So you're going to hear this everywhere. So let's talk today about self-storage. Why you should love self-storage. We're going to go over that very briefly. We're also going to talk about, most importantly, the 5 steps to getting a great self-storage property. Your first, hopefully one of your best properties. Who here has heard the statistic that your first 3 real estate acquisitions kind of make or break your career? Who here has heard that? Maybe 1 or 2 people? Okay, not too many people. So there's a statistic out there that no matter what asset class you're in, the first 3 properties that you pick are going to determine the majority of your success. I only believe that that's true if you only ever buy 3 properties. If you only ever buy 3 properties and they're sucky, they're horrible properties, then yes, you will have a horrible real estate career. But regardless, we want you to get started off on the right foot with self-storage. So I'm going to introduce myself a little bit. My name is Allison Kirschbaum. I'm the managing member of 2 private equity funds that focus on self-storage specifically, Inc. Self-Storage and Quantum Self-Storage. Those are the funds that Adam was referring to earlier. We currently have about 1,500 units of self-storage under management, with another between 900 and 1,500 more units under contract. We put more properties under contract every single week. My team does a lot of it for me. Even I can't keep up with how many units we have at any given time because we're always acquiring more. So this number here could actually be incorrect. We could actually have up to 1,500 more units under contract right now. We are prepping 2 additional Regulation D 506C private equity funds for release to the public this year, Q2 of 2018, because we have such massive demand for self-storage investors all across the country and in some cases across the world. Who here has a definition of creative real estate? Roger. What's your definition of creative real estate? Owner finance? Okay. Yep. Owner finance is one. Maybe lease option. Maybe you use something unconventional as a down payment. Maybe you don't use a bank. We've done all of that. We've done crazy stuff like using a vehicle as a down payment, all the way to doing a complete seller carry loan with 5% down and 5% paid the next year as part of the down payment. We've done all kinds of creative deals. About 70% of all the properties we buy in the funds especially are creatively acquired. And me personally, I have 16 years of business and management experience, mostly in real estate, some in other businesses. I was a little whippersnapper as a kid. I taught myself to cold call at the age of 12, started my first business when I was 9. So I have a huge amount of expertise in a number of different fields. And the reason that I've settled on real estate and self-storage specifically is according to the reasons that we're going to talk about today. So everybody who brought some kind of a note-taking device, whether it's an iPad or a notepad, something, hold it up. Who brought something to take notes with? Hey, most of the room. That's awesome. Give yourselves a round of applause. That is awesome. That was half-hearted applause, but that's okay. So the reason that I want everybody to have some kind of note-taking device is because no matter how smart you are, you cannot possibly absorb all the different points of content that we're going to go through, especially in a content-packed presentation like this. We're going to go through all these things that you see here on the screen, and I need you to take very specific notes for every single slide. I'm going to walk you through those so you remember exactly what you need to do to buy your first great storage property. We're going to talk first about why you should love self-storage. Back in November, in this very room, I did a presentation that was all about why I love self-storage and why you should love self-storage as well. The market demographics, the cash flow that you can attain from self-storage versus other types of asset classes, all that good stuff. So if you would like the slides from that presentation as well, and you did not get them the first time around, Adam will be more than happy to forward them to you, along with the slides from this presentation, which is the next step in the series. We went from why you should love self-storage in November to how you can buy your first great self-storage property today, and hopefully if Adam has me back at some later point in the year, we'll go even deeper and talk about how to manage a great self-storage property for maximum cash flow. The second thing we're going to talk about today is the 4 things you have to consider when you're picking the right type of self-storage for you. Just like single family or multifamily or any other kind of asset class, self-storage has different types, has different layers and levels, and the type of property that you pick, especially for your first one, is going to determine not only your trajectory in cash flow, but your trajectory as a business owner. The type of business that you have, you all know this, affects the way you live your lives, the way your families live their lives, how much cash flow you have to do fun things, all that good stuff. So we're going to go through the different types of storage properties you can consider and the type that might be best for you. Third, we're going to go through the 4 must-haves that I personally have for my self-storage acquisitions when I buy self-storage for our private equity that we do and why it's been so successful for us. And when I say successful, we're talking about double-digit returns to our investors every single year since we opened. I'm talking about 10 cap, 12 cap properties, every single one of our acquisitions, and sometimes we can even get purchase costs as low as $15 a square foot. Can you imagine a better property than that? Buy a property for $15 a square foot, get a 10 cap or a 12 cap cash flow. To me, there's nothing better. So that's what we're going to talk about in point number 3. Number 4, we're going to talk about the 4 things to look for in a great storage business. Storage is a business. It's like assisted living or a hotel or a restaurant. It's not just about the building. It's about the operations of it. And when you're looking at the property, or when you're looking at your first self-storage facility, you want to look at the business first and foremost. We're going to talk about how to do that in point number 4. Point number 5, the 7 keys the pros use to analyze self-storage. We're going to walk point by point through the things you need to know in order to analyze your first property on your own without any specific software, any special tools. I'm not going to ask you to go out and buy a course or something from a guru. I'm going to show you how to do it on your own. Next, we're going to talk about the 6 things you have to do to finance your storage property, and then we're going to talk briefly about the 6 keys to managing your property as soon as you close on it from week 1. A lot of people assume that the biggest struggle is actually getting closed on the property. It can feel that way sometimes, but the bigger challenge is to make sure that once you actually do close on the property, that you're going to remain as profitable as you want to be after. So we're going to touch on that as well. So these are the 4 reasons that I love self-storage, and then I think you should love self-storage as well. The first one is cash flow. Straight, pure, simple cash flow. Who here owns multifamily? I need to see a show of hands. About half the room. That's awesome. Who owns single family? Show of hands again. Okay, some of the same people, about half the room. That's good. So in a multifamily property, let me pick somebody here. In a multifamily property, how much would you say is the average operating expense ratio month to month? Somebody raise their hand. Somebody who owns multifamily. Adam?
35 to 55.
35 to 55. All right. Awesome. In self-storage, we're talking at an operating cost ratio of between 15 and 30%. 35 to 55% operating cost margin, not including debt service for multifamily, 15 to 30% for self-storage operating cost margin. That means that out of every dollar you make with those properties, multifamily versus self-storage, you're going to get between 10 to 15 to 20% greater profit margin. Again, not including debt service because that's a huge variable. It all depends on how you buy your deal. You're going to get 10 to 15 to 20% more cash flow every single month buying a self-storage property than a multifamily property. That's for a number of reasons, including your churn costs, which we're going to go over in a bit here. But in general, self-storage just has much, much lower operating costs than a multifamily property does. It's more profit back in your pocket every single month. Next thing I love about self-storage is the consistency. Every business in the world has ups and downs. It has cycles. It has different times when it's good, different times when it's bad. When we first started buying self-storage over any other asset class in real estate, we wanted to find something that was going to be consistent even in the down times. There's a statistic put out by the Inside Self-Storage Association, which is considered the world's leader in self-storage information. They operate right here in the United States. There's a statistic put out by them in 2016 that says that in 2008 and 2009, which are some considered to be the worst years of the recession, self-storage actually performed better than it did in the boom years prior and in the boom years after. Anybody want to hazard a guess why that is? Anybody in the back here?
We're downsizing it, there's still some.
Very good. Yes, she is correct. Give her a round of applause. That is correct. We've got a group of sharp people here. I had about 4 people get that right in my presentation yesterday. So that is absolutely correct. When somebody downsizes their business, they can no longer afford their office space, they don't need as many employees, they've got a ton of inventory they've got nothing to do with, they're not going to use a big office anymore, right? If you were a business owner in 2008 and 2009, you probably had some of the same experience. You worked out of your house, you cut costs, whatever it was. And if you did use a storage unit, you probably found that it costs you only about 30% as much to rent a storage unit as it did your office space. Even completely equivalent square footage. If you had 500 extra square feet of office space and you rented a 500 square foot storage unit, you would have only spent about 30% as much to have that storage unit, keep your inventory there, keep your furniture there, whatever it was, and you can re-expand after the downturn of the recession goes through. It's the same with households. If you're moving in with your friends, your family, you're consolidating households, be able to afford to pay a $1,500, $2,000, $4,000 mortgage, depending on where you live. You may not be able to pay that every month, but you can certainly afford a $100 or $200 or $300 storage unit to keep all the things that you've so carefully acquired over the years and have them ready for when you move into your new house again after the recession passes. So consistency is the second reason why I absolutely love self-storage. The third reason I love self-storage, something we touched on very briefly a minute ago, churn costs. When you churn a unit in a multifamily property, you got to think about the carpet, you got to think about the paint, you got to think about a number of things that you need to replace and repair and make pretty for the new tenant. You could be talking about a cost, depending on how big the unit is and how much damage your tenant caused, of $500 to $1,000 or more. Completely depends on the tenant, completely depends on your property. When I churn a self-storage unit, I grab my handy leaf blower and I blow that sucker out. I get the dust and the cobwebs out if there's some trash left in there, if the tenant that moved out decided they didn't want to clean everything out. I get Jim Bob, the handyman, to come and chuck it in the dumpster for $10, $12 an hour, and my churn costs are done. I can churn that unit for $20, $25 maximum. The reason that I compare so much to multifamily is for the fourth reason here, combined income, number of units. Why do I compare so much to multifamily? Well, if you're looking at a number of real estate asset classes like retail or office space or single family, if you lose a tenant, you're losing between 30 to 50 to 100% of your income that month. Your income could be completely gone. If for some reason somebody moves out of your single family house or you own a single tenant commercial building, a retail space of some kind, your tenant moves out, your income is screwed. You're completely done that month. However, in a multifamily or a storage building, you've got dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of people, if you're talking about a very large storage facility, paying your rent, paying your expenses for you every month. Even if you have some kind of cataclysmic event, a tornado comes through your property, wipes out half of it, you're still going to be okay in a self-storage property. Maybe not in a multifamily property, because again, your operating cost margin is so much higher. Your break even has to be so much higher. But in a storage property, you're going to be okay. So the combined income, number of units that go into a storage property, are the fourth reason that I love storage as an investment. And that's also the reason that I'm going to be comparing so much to multifamily during this presentation, because the income model is very similar. You've got many, many tenants in one property with a self-storage or a multifamily property versus something like triple net commercial or single family, which is just 1 or 2 or 3 tenants. All right, so I want you to start taking notes here. I know we've got some good food to eat, but I want you to push aside your plate, pick up that notebook and start taking notes, because these are the 4 things you have to consider when you're picking your first self-storage property. So during this presentation, I'm going to be comparing 2 different types of self-storage. REIT quality self-storage, REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust, REIT quality self-storage, like something that Public Storage or Greenbox or another very large private equity firm or a company traded on the stock market would buy. We're going to be talking about that type of storage, and then we're going to be talking about the profitable kind of storage, as I like to call it, which is my kind of storage. We're talking about different types of properties, and I'm going to lay out the differences between those 2 and why we don't want to buy REIT quality self-storage in our private equity funds during this slide here. Remember about REIT quality self-storage, and again, this is the opposite of what we buy. REIT quality self-storage, write this down. It's 50,000 square feet or above net rentable square feet, 50,000 net rentable square feet or above. It's multi-level. There's typically multiple levels stacked on top of each other, like those huge public storage buildings you go by on the highway that don't even look like storage buildings. They look like a fancy apartment building or something like that. They have some kind of security or climate control. They have some kind of special amenity that goes with that building. And it's all on one location. A lot of the properties that we end up looking at are built over multiple periods of time. They're maybe cobbled together from different owners. They're on different locations. Again, that is non-REIT quality self-storage on multiple locations. It works out very well, very profitably for us, but the way the REITs and the larger private equity funds run their income model, that doesn't work for them. So they need all 50,000 square feet to be on one location, one address at a time. So when REITs pick that kind of property, they slot themselves into a very specific income model. They're picking Class A, shiny, pretty, very nice looking trophy kind of properties. Big, brand new, $300 a square foot kind of properties like you see over at the corner of, I think it's 6th and Santa Fe or something like that. But they're building these kind of properties constantly across Denver. And the sales prices for these things are astronomical. There was one built very recently in Aurora here in Colorado in the last couple months that was selling for $300 a square foot. Non-leased, brand new, $300 a square foot for a storage property. Yes, you can make some income off of it, but I can guarantee you the cap rate that the REIT who ended up buying that thing bought it at was between 3 to 4 to 5% cap rate, maybe a 6. They tend to hover around 5 or 5.5. But that's what you have to do to get those big, shiny, pretty REIT quality properties. Now, me and my partners, we like pretty, but we like money better. We like high cash flowing properties better, even if they're a little bit ugly, even if they're a little bit beat up. These 4 features, these 4 elements right here are what help you differentiate between the big, shiny, pretty trophy properties that are going to be easier to finance potentially, but are going to make you a little bit less money. And in the slide after this, we're going to talk about how to find the maybe not quite as pretty, but much more profitable kind of properties that we like. So first thing to consider when you're picking a storage property for you, aside from the size of the property, aside from how it looks, consider who you are as an investor. You're the kind of person that if you have a rental property within a couple hours of your house, or maybe it's on your commute to work, your commute to your office, whatever it is, if you're going to be driving by that property every day, are you the kind of investor that's going to say, oh, look at this weed over here, I got to go pull that weed, I just got to stop and do this real quick? Or, oh, look at this tenant trying to move his stuff out here. Maybe I should go help him out. Or look at this sign that's hanging crooked. I just got to go take care of that. None of those are life-threatening things, right? None of those are keeping people from moving into your units. But if you were the kind of person that, number one, has better things to do than run around and pull weeds and help your tenants trash out units, which I'm sure you do, and number two, you know you are the kind of person that will do these kinds of things on a day-to-day basis and eat up your precious time, don't buy a facility that's close to your house. I made this mistake with my dad. My dad is my 3rd investor. I say that to make the point that I did not start my real estate empire on family money. I started with private investors who didn't know me from Adam and just knew our business plan. My dad was our 3rd investor, and when he bought a property, he and my mom bought one that was close to their house in Branson, Missouri. They wanted something that was in an area that they knew the economics of. It all makes sense, made perfect sense at the time, was a great cash flowing property, 10 to 12 cap, all that good stuff. Gets a double-digit cash on cash return on it from the first year. However, I should have known this. I know my dad better than this. I should have warned him against this, but I didn't. My dad's a business owner. He's owned an IT company for a very long time. And he's a perfectionist, and he's a very hard worker. And I should have known, based on how he takes care of his and my mom's house, that if he was going to drive past this facility at all, he was going to be stopping and spending tons and tons of time perfecting all the little things that can possibly go on with the facility. And sure enough, that's what happened. He drives past this facility every single day to go to the chiropractor and the grocery store and everything else that they have to do, just because that's where life is in Branson, Missouri. They have to drive past this facility. And pretty much every day, I get a call from my mom about 6 o'clock, dinner time, their time, that says, "Your father's over at the facility again. He's not home yet. He's over there doing the handyman's work." And they have a handyman, and they have a manager on site. They have enough personnel to get this done, but still, my dad wants to go and do it all himself. More power to him, but he has a lot better ways to spend his time. So if you are like my dad and you're a perfectionist and you want everything about your property to be perfect and spick and span all the time, do not buy a property close to your house. And if you do have to buy it close to your house, try to buy something that's closer to A-class so you've got less upkeep and less things to consider. Next, consider the size, not just because of the REIT quality, non-REIT quality comparison and whether or not you'll be competing with Public Storage to buy that property or anything like that. Consider how easy a larger trophy type property is to finance. Banks like trophy type REIT quality properties. They like that 50,000 square feet Class A shiny pretty new building. Even though it might cost you as the investor 2 to 5 to 10 times more to buy it, even if you have to raise a lot more capital to get it, banks tend to like to finance those kinds of things. Sometimes they like to finance the smaller, more profitable buildings that we buy because it's very location specific in the markets that we buy in. We might have a lender who's 20 miles away in a little bit different town, but they consider the town that we're in to be such an astronomically different market that they won't lend in it. So we end up going to a bunch of different lenders, and we talk to our private investors, and we use the private equity fund, and we work on creative deals. We end up using a ton of different methods to make sure we get that property financed. So if you have the capital at hand to purchase a very large property, and it's very important to you to be able to easily get consistent bank financing, you might consider going with a larger property. If it's more important to you to be able to use a more creative method, if you maybe don't have as much capital on hand, or you simply don't want to spend as much capital, consider going with a smaller property, but be aware that smaller properties can sometimes be harder to finance. Number 3, smaller properties need less employees. Simple physics, right? You got less units to manage, you need less management. It's always a good thing. If you are like my dad, again, I'm going to use my dad as an example. If you are like my dad, the thought of having employees makes you shudder. You don't like the thought of having somebody looking to you every day and every week for direction. We've got a little problem over here, a little problem over there. Tenant wants their money back. Credit card machine isn't working right. We got a leak in the 3rd unit over on the right, whatever it is. You don't want somebody coming to you, talking to you about those things when you want to go be doing something like fishing on the boat, like my dad, running your other companies, buying a new property, whatever it is. You also don't want to have to deal with the payroll and the taxes and the liability and the insurance that goes with having employees. So consider very carefully before you take on a very large property. Again, REIT quality, 50,000 square foot, Class A kind of property, because that kind of property will require that you have multiple employees on site, no matter what you do. Maybe there's some clever solution out there that I don't know about for how to automate these things and make it so that you don't need employees at the very large properties. But from everything I've seen, you have to have at least 2 to 3 full-time managers at a very large property like that to keep it on par with what your tenants expect. In a smaller property, the kind that we buy, less than 50,000 square feet, in a lot of cases less than 25,000 square feet, you maybe only need 1 manager. Or if you automate it the way we do and you buy the types of properties that we do, you don't need a manager at all. You stick a kiosk on that thing, let it run itself, man. So consider whether or not you really want to have employees when you're considering what kind of facility to buy. And last of all, cash flow. Very simple parameter. You are going to get a lower cap rate with these REIT quality facilities, but because they are bigger properties, you could still end up making more money. If this is something that you want to be your primary business, your primary source of income, consider how many units you're going to have to buy in order to get that done. You're going to need less units for a high cap rate property, obviously, but you might need to cobble together 2 or 3 of these smaller, higher cap rate properties in order to get to that cash flow level. Consider where you want this storage business to drive your income and your lifestyle before you pick your first property. All right, no taking time again. Write these down or take a photo of my slides if you feel compelled. 4 must-haves for our storage acquisitions. Number 1, Property with high cash flow, low maintenance needs, like what everybody wants, but here's the kicker. We don't want any ancillary income streams. No ancillary income streams. Anybody have an example of what they think might be an ancillary income stream on a storage property? Yes?
RV.
RV parking?
RV parking, storage.
Yes, very good. Very good, yep. In a lot of storage facilities, and especially in the REIT quality ones, they will have a U-Haul office inside them to rent trucks and trailers and all that kind of thing. They will have a retail area. They'll have a nice little space set aside to sell you overpriced tape and boxes and locks and all that stuff. And they will very often have RV and boat parking, to Carl's point. I'll come back to you, sir. RV and boat parking especially, all of those ancillary income streams, but RV and boat parking especially, present a huge problem for our income model, because our big thing is not to have managers. Aside from your debt service, your taxes, and in some cases your insurance, it depends what kind of property you buy and what area of the country you're in, your manager's salary is your biggest possible cost to cut out of your facility. Cutting out the cost of a manager's salary, even though it... Sorry. Oh, no, that's fine. Is it... Testing, there we go. Okay, we good? Kinda, everybody still hear me? Okay. Thank you. So a manager's salary in the areas that we buy in isn't super expensive comparatively. They get paid something above minimum wage, $10 to $12 an hour, something like that. In the markets that we buy in, that's a pretty good wage. It's probably equivalent to what you get managing a McDonald's, but you don't have to deal with irate customers and greasy fast food all day. So it's a pretty good job. So we end up spending about $24,000 to $36,000 for a manager's salary if we want to hire a manager for one of our properties. However, that can go as high as $50,000 in some markets in the US. Think about spending $50,000, especially if you're on the West Coast or some area where minimum wage laws are a big topic of discussion. $50,000 a year out the door to have a person to physically manage your property. If you have a smaller property, there's no need for that. Again, REIT quality storage, you do need a manager. If you have something like this, there's absolutely no need for that. So the first thing that we do when we looked at all of the parameters that we could possibly have for what kind of self-storage to buy, when we were first starting ink self-storage and quantum self-storage, is we took a look at what costs could we cut out, what economies of scale could we create to make us one of the most profitable self-storage private equity funds in the country. And the first thing we found was cutting out the manager's salary. We can't legally cut out taxes. I've tried. We can reduce them. We can't completely eliminate them. We can't cut out our debt service unless we buy in cash, which is highly inefficient, reduces our cap rates. But what we can do is get rid of the manager's salary. So that's exactly what we did. We no longer use managers at any of our properties, with the exception of my dad's property, which is an outlier. In all of our private equity fund properties, we don't use any managers at all. They're all run by kiosk. Next, we always want to be in a property in a secondary or tertiary market. Secondary or tertiary market, which excludes Denver, it excludes LA, it excludes San Francisco, it excludes Portland, it excludes almost every larger city that you might think is desirable to live in. We exclude those for a couple of different reasons. Number one is because they're cyclical. We have to worry about the fluctuations in property values up and down based on the movements in and out of the area from housing demand and so on and so forth. We don't want to have to look at it that hard. We want to be able to hold these properties for 7 to 10 years and make consistent profits for our investors during the entire time. So we tend to pick markets that have either very flat or no appreciation at all, like the Midwest and the Southeastern United States. We're in tertiary markets in terms of competition. So REITs, like Public Storage or Greenbox or CubeSmart or any of these people, they like those big cyclical markets. They like to hot markets where there's tons of people moving in at once because they have tons of customers. That's how self-storage works. Self-storage follows housing. If there's a huge boom in housing in Columbus or Cleveland, there's going to be a huge boom in storage in Columbus or Cleveland. But if a big REIT or Public Storage or Greenbox or any of those guys decides to move into one of the markets that we're in, that's the number one risk to our business that we cannot eliminate. We can eliminate every other risk that we've been able to associate with the self-storage business. Employment costs, theft, whatever, check, got that, we're just not going to have any employees. Cyclical markets, check, got that, we're just not going to invest there. property values going up and down, or customer retention rates going up and down because of a bad economy, check, got that. Storage is already a great asset class for that. Tornado comes through the property and mows half of it down, we got insurance, check, we've already mitigated that. But the one risk that we cannot mitigate if we're buying in these large markets is the risk that Public Storage is going to slap a brand new pretty Class A facility on the corner down the street from my little B or C class property. There's no way I can compete with that. Somebody might stay with us because of price, but I don't want to be the Walmart of self-storage. I don't want to have to tell people you should rent with us because you're cheapest, because that's a great way to get cheap, crappy tenants that are going to move out if you ever raise the rent $1. So we decided instead to mediate that potential risk by just buying in markets that big REITs and Public Storage and Green Box and all these people don't want to be in. We want to be in markets that have 60,000 people or less in a 5-mile radius from the center of the city, like about the size of Parker, Colorado. Parker, Colorado is about the biggest town that I would ever buy in, but Parker is excluded because it's a hot market. There's tons of people moving in. So next year, they're projecting that Parker is going to be 75,000 people, and the year after that, 85,000 people, and so on and so forth. There's a huge number of people moving in. So we don't want to be in a market like that because that is also attracted to a big REIT. I want to stay away from markets like that so that we're not stomped on by big guys at some point. Because short of taking an RPG and shooting through their construction site when they're about to start building, there's nothing I can do to keep them from deciding to build right down the street from my property. So we have to simply pick markets that are not attractive to them to begin with. Next, I've touched on this before, but I'm going to go over it really briefly again. The third thing that we always look for in our storage properties is that we always want them to have a 10 cap, at least a 10 capitalization rate when we first purchase them, with the ability to move to a 12 or higher. And some of you in the audience are thinking, there's no way you can do that with every property. A 10 cap, a double-digit cap rate every time? Come on. And on top of that, being able to raise that cap rate? No way. Absolutely we can do that. And here's why. Self-storage is an extremely fragmented market. About 85% of the properties that are self-storage properties in the country. And then that's around 86,000 properties in the entire US. 85% of those 86,000 properties are owned by mom and pop owners. These are owners that own 1 to 5 facilities, no more. They are not professional storage owners. They maybe built it themselves, or they inherited it from somebody, or they had a blank piece of land and they decided to slap some storage units on it and see what they could do with it 10, 15, 20 years ago. And then for them, time stopped. They filled it up, they leased some units to their friends, to the other people in their town, they set some rates, everybody's good to go, hunky-dory. And time stopped. Between that day and now, when I'm looking to buy their property, they haven't raised rents a dime. Meanwhile, there have been other properties in their competition radius, 3 to 5 to 10 to 20 miles away from them, depending on the size of your market, and that has a few variables to it. Those other properties have either been building new units or they've been raising rents on their current units, to the point where the market rate, this comparative street rate for the same type of unit that I have, if they have a drive-up unit with a roll-up door on a gravel platform, it's 10 by 10 unit, no lights inside, nothing fancy, and I have a 10 by 10 unit, no lights inside, nothing fancy, and they're charging $130 for that unit, the unit that I'm trying to buy with this type of mom and pop owner is probably charging $100. We're talking about a 30% gap between where the rents at the facility that I'm looking to buy and the rents at the facilities in the surrounding market are at. 30%. And that is typical. I have never seen a facility like this that had less than a 15% overall gap in where rents are being charged and where they should be. That's 15 to 30% extra income every single month straight to you. We can go in, first day we close, issue a letter to the tenants that says, hey, we're your new owners. Guess what? Your $100 unit now costs $120. Aren't you glad we're in your life? And in most cases, very few people move out. We're talking about somebody essentially moving all of their stuff out of a huge 10 by 15 or 10 by 20 unit, which is a very common size in these rural markets. We're talking about them having to move all of their stuff out of their vehicles and cars and boats and all of the crap that we accumulate over all the years in that huge unit. They don't want to move that out, especially in the middle of an Ohio July or a Kansas winter. They don't want to have to move all of that stuff. So they will put up with that $20 increase. They will pay it. Some people leave, granted, that's fine, whatever. But for the rest of the people that stay, we're getting an extra 15 to 20 to 30% off of each of those units every single month. And that continues. It takes us a little while to get up to the full street rates, especially with some units that are way below the market rate. That 30% is an average. Most unit sizes will be between 15 and 20% below the market rate, and then you'll have some that are 35 to 40%. So it averages around 30%. We don't want to shock everybody at once with this huge increase in rates. So we'll usually say, if we're going to raise rents 30%, we'll do 15% the first year, a small raise every 6 months, something like that. Another 15% the second year. We usually cap that at about 18 months. So after 18 months, we're making 30% more income than the prior owner was for absolutely no CapEx. No CapEx. I'm not talking about going in there and repainting everything and paving the driveways and giving everybody lots of amenities. No, no. This is exactly the same facility that it was when the prior owners had it, except we see the opportunity that they didn't. That's why number 3 is such a priority for us. These properties are out there. People are leaving money on the table in these smaller properties, and we're going to go get them. Number 4, I've hammered on this a lot, so I'm only going to say it briefly. We want properties smaller than 50,000 square feet, non-REIT quality properties for which we are not competing with green box and public storage and all that kind of thing, and which can be managed by a kiosk. Kiosk management means that we cannot have those ancillary income streams like parking or retail or hair salons or weed dispensaries or any of the other weird stuff that you see tacked onto storage properties. Our purchase cannot include any of those elements. If those things are included with the property that we want to buy, we're either going to cut it off during the contract, we're going to say you get to keep it, or our friend Jim Bob over here is going to buy it from us before we ever close. We're going to wholesale this piece of the property, whatever it is. But we do not want to close on a property that has those ancillary income. They require a manager to keep Tommy from running his camper into Sally and Joe's motor home when he's parking it in his little space that he only ever pulls it in and out of 2 or 3 times a year. And because he only pulls it into and out 2 or 3 times a year, the hair salon that rents a unit next to us and they renovated it into a nice little boutique shop or whatever, that requires us to have a manager to deal with all the people and all of the upkeep and all of the issues that go with having that kind of income stream on property. So in order for us to make sure that we can manage this property by kiosk, we cut off all of those ancillary income streams right up front. I want you to remember this phrase. Write this down if you don't have it written down already. Pretty costs money, ugly makes money. Pretty costs money, ugly makes money. I had a gentleman in a presentation I was doing on Tuesday. I said that phrase. It's a phrase that one of my first exchange brokers told me when I was looking at my first creative deal, when he encouraged me to buy this kind of property. I said this phrase during this presentation on Tuesday, and the gentleman says from the back of the audience, I don't think he thought anybody would hear him, he goes, "I don't think a pimp would agree with that statement." Well, there are some businesses where pretty obviously makes more money, but in this business, no. Nobody cares what their unit looks like. So, we want to buy B and C class properties, 2nd or 3rd generation, could be steel, could be stone, could be masonry, could be a number of different things. 2nd or 3rd gen properties, no ancillary income streams. That's the type of business that we want to buy. That's how we want to run it. We want that secondary or tertiary market, 60,000 people or less. Cap rate of at least 10, again, with the potential to raise it at least 2 points. And we want the smaller size with the kiosk management. This is kind of the summary of the 2 slides that we've just gone over. So last chance to take a photo of this. These are the 7 keys that the pros use to analyze a self-storage property. And this is going to look really similar to what you would do for a multifamily property. Because again, self-storage and multifamily both have that multi-tenant model. You use very similar analysis methods. You use very similar means of determining actual and potential income. Very similar across the board during the analysis process. But again, you find that your profit margins are going to be a lot higher with self-storage than they would be at the end of the analysis than they would be with a multifamily. So the first key, use your favorite multifamily analysis sheet and just add some more unit sizes. People make it like rocket science to try and analyze a self-storage property. They want to buy a fancy sheet or a specific spreadsheet or a specific program to analyze your storage property. You don't need to do that. We actually had to develop a specific self-storage analysis sheet all from scratch, all on our own. And I bought every self-storage course on the market, literally everyone. I defy you to show me a book or a course on self-storage that I have not been through. And we never could find a great analysis sheet that we liked when we were first starting to analyze property for our private equity funds. So we built one from the ground up. What we should have done, what has saved us a lot of time, is just to use a multifamily analysis sheet. You're going to be able to just cut off a bunch of expenses, line through them, you don't need them, and then for what you need to add on, just add more unit sizes. If you have a 1 or a 2 or a 3 bedroom on your multifamily analysis sheet, change those names and make them a 5x10 unit, a 10x10, a 10x15. Add the 5 or 6 most common self-storage unit sizes. You can see them on any self-storage facility's website in the state of Colorado, the most typical sizes that you would add to that multifamily analysis sheet, and go on from there. Second, you still want to factor your current income to get your actuals for your lender, and then factor your potential income to get your pro forma. Again, just like multifamily, you want to know how much you're making now, how much you can make in the future, and when. Then you're going to do your rent study. And this is different from almost any other asset class you're going to take a look at, because self-storage is so fragmented. It's much more difficult than we would like it to be, because we analyze so much self-storage, to get correct rates and comparisons between different self-storage properties that could be your competition. If you have a multifamily property, chances are your competition has a website of some kind. They probably have a manager at the property, a leasing company, a management company, somebody that you can contact to figure out what they're offering that you might be competing against. In a lot of cases with self-storage, if this property is very small, very mom and pop, very kind of stuck in the old days with paper contracts and a manager on site and all this kind of thing, which happens a lot, we have to physically call up every facility and pray and hope that there is actually a manager on site and that they will actually give us accurate comparisons between the types of units that they have and their prices. We want to make sure that we get as accurate as a comparison between our properties and our competition radius, which is, again, between 3 to 5 to 10 miles away from the facility, depending on how many miles it takes you to find at least 10 competitors that have comparable units to yours. In all of those properties that we have to analyze, maybe 4 to 5 of them will have any kind of information online. The rest of them, we have to call them up personally and just hope that, number one, the manager is willing to give us the information, and number two, that there actually is a manager on site. A lot of these smaller properties will manage their facilities essentially by mail. They have a sign at the property that says, hey, if you'd like to rent a unit, drop a form in this box, or come see me at my office at Gutters and Garages down the street, or whatever it is. They'll have it. It's like a treasure hunt. They send people on a treasure hunt, scavenger hunt kind of thing to go and rent a unit. There's no actual manager on site. That makes it just as hard for us to find somebody to talk to who can give us accurate unit sizes and rents to compare against. So keep at it until you can find 10 properties that have comparable unit sizes to yours. If you have drive-up units, make sure that you're picking drive-up units to compare against. Don't compare against your Class A, Class B, climate control kind of units. Pick the same unit sizes if at all possible. Do a little fudging of the numbers to make sure that all of your units fit into those nice, neat categories of 5x10, 10x10, 10x15 sizes so you can get an accurate comparison. And pick the same amenities. An amenity to a storage facility are not at all what you would think they would be as compared to a multifamily. In a multifamily, an amenity is something like a gym or a game room or a movie room. It's as simple as having a paved drive. Especially in these secondary and tertiary markets, most of them are gravel drives. If you have a paved drive, that's considered an amenity because your stuff doesn't get as dusty and your vehicles don't get chipped and all this stuff. Having a fence with an electronic gate is an amenity. Having cameras on site or having lights that turn on automatically at night is an amenity. These are the kinds of things that you need to compare against the property that you want to buy to make sure that you're getting an accurate comparison against other units that your potential tenants could be renting. Then factor in just these 6 costs. You're going to have a few little bit different costs from area to area. In some areas, you might have a water tap at the property for some reason. Some properties use more electricity than others, whatever, but the costs for utilities are extremely minimal. These are going to be your major costs, not including debt service or taxes. Insurance, marketing, tech, which is basically your kiosk, the software to run your kiosk, and some very, very minimal CapEx, one-time expenditure. Do not include a manager in your pro forma. Because you know what happens when you take a actual expense sheet to a banker that shows $25,000 for a manager and a pro forma expense sheet to that same banker that shows a lack of that $25,000 expense? You get to tell that banker, I just saved you $25,000 right out the gate. That goes straight to your DSCR, debt service coverage ratio. It's a number banks love to see. The higher it is, the better it is. Right, John? Higher the DSCR, the better. Because it proves the viability of the property. The higher the DSCR, the higher the profit margin, the more comfortable the bank feels about it. Cutting off $25,000 in manager expenses right out of the gate is a great way to prove that you got some financial savvy right out of the gate. So, as soon as you factor in these costs, excluding a manager, you've analyzed your actual rent versus your potential rent. You've seen how high you can possibly raise those same units that you already have on your property based on the market, how much more rent you could be getting from them right out of the gate. Then you're going to analyze your various financing options. And I touched on this very briefly earlier. And one thing you need to realize about self-storage facilities is that it's not as simple as just going to a lender and saying, hey, I need a loan on this. You're going to have to go to at least a couple of different lenders. However, self-storage tends to be a very misunderstood asset class. Banks will tell you that they like to lend on it. They pretend they like to lend on it. Every single one of them will tell you, oh yeah, we can do a self-storage loan. But when you actually get into the nitty-gritty of it with them, a lot of them will back out because they don't understand it like they thought they did, or somebody's uncle's grandpa who used to own a self-storage property just to slap something on a piece of land that he had, didn't make any money from it, vetoes it, and something like that. Most banks, unless they have specifically loaned on a self-storage property that is at least within the same county and with at least $200,000 to $300,000 of the same purchase prices you're going to need for your facility, will not do it. Especially in these secondary and tertiary markets, these high cap rate markets, banks are very location specific. If we have a facility over here in a town 10, 15 miles away, it's not that far away because there's nothing in between it but cornfields. We're not talking about an extremely different market here. We're talking about essentially an extension of the same town. If I have a lender in this, my facility is in this town, and between us there's nothing but cornfields, and they're essentially the same market, they still will not lend on my storage property because they're in this town and we're in that town. You have to be very, very careful when picking your lender and putting all your eggs in one basket with one or two lenders, because in a lot of cases you're going to swing and miss. So do three things when you're first analyzing your financing options for your storage facility. Number one, submit at least 3 to 5 separate lending applications to 3 to 5 separate lending institutions. Bank, credit union, whatever you have in your area. 3 to 5 every time. And again, make sure that they have lent on self-storage before. That does not excuse you from qualifying them before you submit those applications. Also, at the same time that you're waiting for the banks to finish looking over your applications and asking you questions and dithering and dancing around them, go to your private lenders. Give them the actuals and the pro formas that you've already created. Give them as many details as you can. Whet their appetite. Tell them that you've got a deal in the works. Get them thinking about it. And at the same time you're doing both of those, get cozy with the sellers. Especially with these mom and pop sellers, you have a huge opportunity to do a creative kind of deal. You could get seller carry. You could get a lease option. You can get a wrap. You could use something unconventional as a down payment. You could use full private lender financing, and maybe the seller will carry the down payment. You can work it almost any way you want if you can get a good enough relationship going with the seller. So do all of those 3 financing strategies at once. Talk to the banks, talk to your private lenders, and talk to the seller. And once you've come through all of those options and you think you've found one that's finally going to work, however many months that takes, typical storage property closes in about 3 months. It can take 6 to 8 months, depends on how complicated it is and various other factors. Once you've gone through all of those options and you're ready to close after there's 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 months, make sure that your cap rate still applies. This should go without saying, but I made this mistake when I was a new investor, and I went through all the struggle and all the process of trying to get the lending in place, and we strove and strove to get it done, and it finally came together, and we finally had the loan ready. And then the financing option that we had was a little too expensive. The one that finally worked out made it so that we were either making a very, very small amount of money or we were just breaking even. And being young and having fire in the belly to just close on my first property, I closed on it. And thankfully it worked out. We were able to raise the rents the way we wanted to, and we made it a good deal in the long run. But word of advice, always after you've gone through all those financing options, don't let yourself be suckered into a deal that the cap rate doesn't end up working out. And then very last, begin with the end in mind. Get an exit strategy. Figure out what it's going to be with this property from the day that you're ready to close on it. Your exit strategy could be, it could be something as simple as you want to sell it to another private investor in the area. It could be you want to expand on it later. You want to add more units and make it shiny and pretty and bank on the fact that a REIT might want to buy it from you. You might want to sell it to a private equity group like us. You might want to do, like a lady in my presentation on Monday said, who stated that she didn't want an exit strategy. She wanted to hang on to that property until the day she died. That is an exit strategy in itself, because eventually you are no longer going to physically be around to manage that property and oversee its welfare. If that's an exit strategy you want, if you want to hold it 25 years and pass it on to your kids, treat it as that kind of an asset in your exit strategy. Put it in your will. Put it into a trust when you buy it. Make your kids the trustees, whatever you got to do. But begin with the end in mind and know what you want to do with this property down the road. Next, we're going to go into second to last slide here. 6 things you need to do to finance your storage property. We're going to go a little bit more in depth on what I just talked about on how to qualify your self-storage lender. Number 1, decide on your financing strategy first. We touched on this. Go to 3 types of lenders first: your institutional lenders, your private lenders, and your potential creative deal methods with your seller. And if you're financing any portion of this property, and it's not a complete seller finance, if you're using private lenders or you're using a bank, you're using any kind of lender outside of your own cash or complete seller finance, you have to get your management company on board with your lender. And when I say management company, this does not mean that you need to have an employee on site called a manager working on your property for you. This is something like an equity partner or a third-party contracted management company, and there are dozens of these contracted management companies available for self-storage. You need to have some kind of equity level, or again, third-party manager. If they're not going to be your actual partner in the business, you need to have a contract set up with them, preferably before you go to the lender, or at least have one in the works so that you can show it to them. The lender needs to have a comfort level with your experience. And because you're in this room today, I'm going to assume that your experience as a self-storage investor and a self-storage owner is probably very small to nil. The banks know that too, and they're not comfortable with that. Because this is a business, they need to see that you have a specific manager. They don't necessarily want to know that you have somebody physically on site renting units to each person. That's neither here nor there. Your kiosk can do that for you. But they want to see that you have somebody on your team who has approved the strategy that you're using to finance it, to run it, to raise rents, to study, whatever it is. And again, that can be an equity partner, like I was lucky enough to have almost right out of the gate, or it can be a third-party manager. If you're looking for a third-party management company, the costs for this are very, very nominal, especially for this very small kind of facility that we're talking about. Go to InsideSelfStorage.com, the nation's leading resource for all things self-storage, InsideSelfStorage.com. They have a huge directory that I think they typically call the best of business, and they have a list of dozens of third-party management companies specific to self-storage. Now, one question that I tend to get on this specific topic is whether or not you could just use a multifamily manager. Does it have to be somebody that's specific to self-storage? Yes, it does. You could never ask a self-storage person to manage multifamily. Why? This multifamily person managing self-storage is going to take a very, very conservative approach. They're not going to raise your rent 15 to 30%. They're going to say that's absolutely crazy. There's no way we could do that. Everybody will move out because they're used to multifamily. Your rent's 2 to 5% per year, maybe. They will not run it into the ground, but they will also not make you successful the way you should be successful with a self-storage manager. Self-storage manager cannot possibly manage a multifamily property because they will raise rents. So don't ever mix your types of property managers. Get a very specific self-storage management company. Manage your self-storage property. Don't ever mix the two. And make sure that your lender has lent on self-storage before, preferably your specific banker that's working on this deal with you. Ask them if they have transacted any self-storage loans before. How big were they? How many units? What kind of units? Was this one of those shiny, pretty Class A properties, or was it a B or C class property like the one you're buying? Where exactly was it? Was it right down the street from them within view of the office window? Was it 20 minutes away? Was it right next to the property that you're trying to buy? Figure out where it is. It's very, very important in these very small lender scenarios because they tend to be very location specific. A very small difference in location can mean the difference between getting the loan or not. So vet that with the person that's saying they're going to give you the loan before you send in your application to them. Save yourself some time. Next, make sure of your lender's lending criteria. Try and do all of this in one conversation if possible. Ask them about your LTV. What kind of LTV can you expect? Conservative and best case scenario. Usually the LTV that you're going to get comes down in the lower conservative end of that estimate. But I've had some cases where the bank will actually give me a better LTV than I expected. The very first storage property I ever bought, I thought it was going to be an 80-20 loan. The week of closing, they called me up and said, hey, this is your closing statement. And I looked at it and said, this can't possibly be right. This is an 85-15. Oh yeah, we're actually giving you an 85-15. What? But that's very, very rare. I can almost guarantee you that's never going to happen again. In most cases, your self-storage facility LTV is going to fall somewhere between 25 and 40% down payment. In some cases, your bank will let you use private equity funds like a private lender or a seller carry and make that part of your down payment. Create both your actuals and pro formas like we talked about before. Take them with you to the very first meeting with your lender. The bank cares, number one, about whether they're going to get paid back and whether you're going to have enough profit in the mix to make sure that that happens every month. That's what your actuals and pro formas are going to show them. And again, I cannot stress this enough. Get your management and your lenders in the same room or on the same phone call every time you talk to your lender. Whether it's an equity partner that's going to come in and be your management partner and they're going to take a little equity or the profits or whatever it is, or it's a contracted company that you're bringing in to do third-party management. Get them on the same call with your lenders every time you talk to them. Because your lender wants to hear from you things like, oh yeah, this is how we're going to raise rents. This is what our strategy is going to be. They like to hear that from you, but they need to hear it from your management partner. And it just saves everybody time. It makes the loan process so much smoother. And in some cases can save your loan if you get your management company on board with your lender right out of the gate. And very last slide here. We're going to assume that everything has gone rosy, everything has been great, you've found a very high cash flowing self-storage property, you've closed on it, and it's day number one. What are you going to do now? First, set your cash flow targets and set your rent raise calendar. Top 2 points here. If you know you're going to raise your rates, start right away. Set a calendar to show how many people you're going to raise at what point and by what means. If you're going to put a notice on your new kiosk so that every time somebody enters the property through your gate system, whatever it is, if you have a controlled entry system that hooks to your kiosk and people see a certain message every time they enter your facility, maybe you want to give them a rent raise notice on the kiosk. If you have to send a letter, send letters. Figure out who you're going to send them to and when and for how much. And budget out that total rent raise that you want to create, that 15 to 30% over a 12 to 18 month period, depending on how much you're raising rents overall. Next, get a kiosk. Serious people, get a kiosk. Don't get a big $6,000, $18,000 model from Open Tech Alliance or any of that. They're okay. They're fine kiosks, but they're not great. Get the type of kiosk that we have, which uses SiteLink software. You need software to go with your kiosk, and it's run from an iPad Pro. They cost you $1,200. $200 a month for the software, $1,200 total for the kiosk to purchase, setup, installation, everything. And there's your management cost for the entire year. You end up paying half a month's salary to get your kiosk in place, and you never have to pay a manager again. It's like the greatest invention in the history of self-storage. And like any other business, self-storage, if you're gonna avoid the trap of the person that you bought this facility from and end up leaving tons of money on the table year after year, if you're gonna avoid that, like any other business, self-storage has to be tracked, reviewed, and improved. After you raise your rents the first time, don't just slack off and say, hey, we've raised our rents, we're totally good to go. Most self-storage owners raise their rents over and above what their original rent raise was done to. Once they've gotten to market rate, they're on an even keel within the first 18 to 24 months, whatever it is, they've raised all of their rents to market rate. They're making almost exactly what the competition is. Most self-storage owners will raise their rents year after year 3 to 5%. And that works great for them. You don't get a ton of people moving out from that. You'll have a few people, sure, but if they're going to be cheap enough to move out of your facility for $2 to $3 to $5, in general, we've found it's not even about the money. It's about the fact that they know somebody is paying enough attention to the facility to raise rents, and they're doing something illegal in their unit. Maybe not cooking meth. It's maybe not a Breaking Bad rerun, but they could be storing coolers full of marijuana in there, like I found in a facility in Kansas last year. They could be breeding rats in there, literally, true story. They could be doing any number of illegal or unsanitary or just nasty things in that storage unit. And the fact that you are paying enough attention to raise rates makes them nervous. So raise your rates 3 to 5% every year. It gets rid of the riffraff and it keeps you it keeps you above the waterline with inflation and all the other costs that go up year after year. And whatever else can possibly be tracked, reviewed, and improved about your business, pay attention to how the competition is maybe adding or decreasing amenities. Did they used to have a fence, but now they don't for some reason, and they're putting more RVs and boats? You don't need to add that fence you thought you needed to add in order to keep up with the competition. Do you maybe need to think about adding storage units to extra land so that you can have more storage units without increasing your management costs? Think about the way that you can keep up with the industry and improve over time. We're going to take some questions in just a second. Thank you guys so much for listening. You've been a great audience. I really hope you got something good out of this.